Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
It says you're a dead fuck.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, the world's greatest horror movie podcast. In this episode, my weird dad will be talking about
Jason is back. 3 times before, you have felt the terror, known the madness, lived the horror. But this is the one you've been screaming for. Because Friday, April 13th, will be Jason's unlucky day. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, rated R.
Hello and welcome back to Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror. This is Mark Begley, your host, and this is the third episode of the Why Do I Hate Slashers I Don't Actually series on Joseph Zito's 1984 slasher classic, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and most definitely my favorite of the Friday the 13th franchise. I gotta admit, upon rewatch of this, I got super excited to talk about it, and I realized I wasn't as excited to talk about My Bloody Valentine as I thought I would be after I rewatched that one. But this one still holds up for me, and part of it's nostalgia, and part of it is that it is one of the better slashers, especially from the later period, which we had gotten to by 1984. And as I mentioned, it is absolutely my favorite Friday the 13th. I watched the first 4 kind of in an odd manner. I think I mentioned on the last episode that I watched part 1, or the original, on Halloween because I was watching classics. I watched the final chapter for this episode, and then I went back because I had some time, wanted to give myself a few days between episodes, and so I watched part 2, and then I went ahead and watched part 3, and I watched part 3 in 3D for the first time. I forgot that the cheap little 4-pack that I bought came with 3D glasses and didn't require a 3D TV. It was just, you could choose to view it that way. And I think my TV settings and it being a high-definition TV and this being a DVD of not the best quality kind of hampered that viewing, but it worked in spots and not so much in others. But anyway, I watched all 4 and found myself with a whole bunch of spare time and watched the really long, really exhaustive documentary on the Friday the 13th series, all the way and up to the reboot, Crystal Lake Memories, which is on Shudder. It is over 6 hours long, and actually, when I figured out the time, it's listed at 400 minutes, and if you divide that by 60, That is 6 hours and not 66 minutes, but it's 6 hours and 40 minutes, but that's 6 hours and then 2/3 of an hour, which is 6.66 hours. So how's that for something totally irrelevant in regards to Friday the 13th? But I thought that was kind of fun.
That's so interesting.
As I said, part of my enjoyment of this film is nostalgia. I watched this with some friends at my friend Andy's house on video, so it would have been sometime in 1985 or possibly later, and it was either a birthday party or Halloween party or slumber party. It might have just been 3 or 4 of us guys spending the night at his house, which we often did, and rented numerous videos, mostly horror, sometimes comedies, and sometimes other stuff when we could get a hold of it. And I remember really, really liking this film and not being a fan of slashers at the time or even in the future. I couldn't quite understand why. I didn't have that critical eye back then to think of all the reasons why this one worked for me and most other slashers didn't. But I kind of picked up on that later on in life, and especially when thinking about doing this episode and my rewatch of it, I kind of figured out exactly why I like this one so much, and I'll get into all that later on. I don't know what I had seen previously in the franchise. I don't know if I had seen 1, 2, or 3 at all. It's quite possible that I saw 3 before this and didn't care much for it, but I really don't know. I know that we watched part 5 as a group together, and it almost makes me think that we watched them back to back. And so this would have actually been when part 5 came out, when that came out on video. So that would have even been later. That would have been in 1986. A little shaky on that memory. All I know is I had it in my head how much I liked the final chapter and how disappointed I was in A New Beginning. And after that, other than watching the final chapter from time to time, I don't think I really dug too deeply into the later parts of the franchise or went back to the first 3 all that often. When I got back into horror a few years ago, I watched them in succession all the way through, I think, part 8. And of course, now I'm blanking on the title of that one. But I did not watch Jason in Space. I didn't watch Jason in New York. And I have never seen Freddy vs. Jason. I lose track of the count and the numbers of which is which since they stopped using the numbers after part 3 and went to subtitles. I did watch the reboot around the same time when I was watching all of the originals, or most of the originals, I should say. And I like it. It's a little bit confusing since they try to cram, I think, bits and pieces from the first 4 movies into one film. But, as far as those modern remakes go, it's not bad. It's super gory and there's a lot of nudity. So if nothing else, you got those 2 things to look forward to. But there is a fair amount of TNA in the final chapter, and the gore was more prominent than the prior 3. Before I get into the final chapter in depth, or at least as much in depth as I'm going on these episodes, I wanted to kind of go over the timeline of the previous films and where this lands in that and how they're connected. There are some connections here. The first film takes place in 1979, and we know that definitively because in part 3, I believe, when they pass the grave site where Pamela Voorhees is buried, it has the date of her death as 1979. Now, part 2, for whatever reason, takes place 5 years later, and that was released in, I believe, 1982. So it is a near future world, and I don't know if that was just to create distance from the first film as far as, why would these people be going back and trying to reopen this camp now? And so that is 1984. Part 3 takes place immediately after Part 2, and Part 4 takes place immediately after Part 3, which brings it to the present day because the final chapter was released in 1984. And of course, that fouls up the whole Friday the 13th idea with Part 2 taking place on Friday the 13th. That means Part 3 takes place on the, 14th and 15th, and then this one takes place the next Monday through however many days it's supposed to last. So, they don't all take place on Friday the 13th, but I guess that doesn't really matter. The one interesting thing that made me think about was, my God, Jason was busy during this 4 or 5 day period. He goes through all of the counselors in Part 2. The friends in Part 3 has nothing to do with a camp at that point. They're just hanging out at a house that is in the same area, which is very similar to what happens in Part 4. And with the end of Part 2 and Part 3 in mind, with police presence and all these bodies being found, you wonder why they would even let anybody go and vacation in these homes. But let's put aside the logic and suspend our disbelief for a while. Almost seems like it would have been better if they had it take place months down the road, which is another thing I will get to. This has to do with one of the characters in the final chapter and his search for his sister. So if the final chapter is not about camp counselors getting hacked to pieces by Jason, what is it about? Well, this time we have a family unit with the Jarvises, Mom, Trish, and Tommy, who live near Crystal Lake. And then we have a group of 6 teens who are coming to stay at a house. I don't know if it's a rental or it belongs to one of their relatives, right across the street from them. We also have the addition of this character, Rob, who is supposedly hunting in the woods nearby. So we have 3 storylines, and we get to interweave and cut between all 3 of those during the film, which is another one of those things that I really enjoy about this. We don't have to keep finding reasons to separate this group of teens or camp counselors. We can cut between stories and have part of the tension created that way. As I mentioned, this takes place immediately after the events of Part 3, and they even went so far as to recreate the end of that film with Jason's dead body in the barn, and the police and ambulance there to, of course, remove the bodies and try to find survivors. So Jason is hauled off to a nearby hospital where he, of course, becomes revived and starts killing people so that he can work his way back home. And this is where I started to think, oh yeah, this kind of reminds me of Halloween 2 with the morgue assistant and the nurse fooling around and getting taken out by Jason, which is similar to the EMT driver and nurse being taken out in Halloween 2. And so that kind of stuck in my head as I watched the movie and thought, okay, what are some other connections here, either to the Friday the 13th franchise or to other slasher films? And that's when I realized that this had echoes of the original Halloween throughout. And this may not be anything new, especially to people who are more not just into slashers, but into the Friday the 13th franchise overall. That might be more apparent, but it was the first time that I noticed how similar they were. And even though I'm aware that Friday the 13th was originally created to be a Halloween ripoff, Sean Cunningham states as much, I never really got the same kind of feel from these that I get from Halloween. But I do get it from this entry. And a big part of that is this family unit, the Jarvises, with Mom and Trish, played by Kimberly Beck, and little Tommy, played by Corey Feldman, and how that kind of mirrors Lori and Tommy in Halloween. And then with the 6 or 8 teens, since they pick up the twins, Tina and Terry, when they are out looking for the lake, with the teens across the street, it's sort of set up like the Wallace's house in Halloween, directly across from where Laurie Strode and Tommy Doyle are. There's a lot more kids, but it's the same kind of scenario, and so that just really made an impression on me this time. And having that parent there is, although we don't see that so much in Halloween, there are parents and police and all that, how that is quite different from all of the previous Friday the 13th films. And then the final connection that I made with Halloween, I just thought of today before I started recording, was with the character Rob, played by Eric Anderson. And he tells Trish and Tommy that he is hunting bear in the woods, and they kind of, Tommy blows that off and says, there's no bears around here. And when he finally explains why he is really there, it made me think, oh, this is the Loomis character for this film. He is actually actively hunting down Jason Voorhees. Now, this is where the timeline kind of gets fouled up. His sister, as he explains, is named Sarah, and there was a Sarah character in part 2. And if we go by the timeline that these films have created for themselves, this is only a few days after her death. Now, whether they found her body or not, you would have to guess. But there was a police presence at the end of part 2. There was a police presence at the end of part 3. Apparently, Rob hears about this stuff in the news and comes to look for her, not knowing that she's dead. So, again, suspend your disbelief a little bit. That's when I think it would have worked better to have this take place a little further down the road, a couple months, where if her body hadn't been found, it would make sense for him to be actually looking for her. But, minor quibble aside. So I really love the family angle with the Jarvises. I really love this vigilante angle with the character of Rob. And as far as the teen angle, I'm happy with this because they are, for the most part, likable characters. And I know I've said this numerous times. I really don't like awful characters in these films, and I understand the reason to do it, to, I guess, make the audience happy when they're killed, which is kind of a perverse way to go about it. I'd rather feel bad when these nice characters, we know kids are going to get killed. I think it gives a little more depth when they're nice and you really don't want to see them go. And I think part of that for me, which might make me different than a lot of slasher fans, is that I don't root for the bad guy. I don't connect with Jason. I don't connect with Michael Myers. I don't connect with these other famous slasher killers. So I try to side with the kids, and if they're awful, horrible kids, it makes it a lot harder to do. Ted, played by Lawrence Monason, he's a little bit annoying. One of the other characters who I can't remember, he kind of blends into the background. He's there with his girlfriend, but he's flirting with one of the twins that they run into and take back to the house to party with. And so that's kind of a dickhead move. It doesn't go very far, but I always hate that needless drama with love triangles and all that. That's just another pet peeve of mine. But that's our tropey device to separate couples and have one of them go off and skinny dip. For the most part, they are likable. Sarah and her boyfriend Doug are a little, what's the term? White bread. And Sarah kind of works as a red herring as far as the final girl. We're not really sure at the beginning who the final girl will be. It seems to me that they set it up to be Sarah for a bit, especially since she is portrayed as virginal. And so we're a little unsure whether it's going to be Sarah or Trish for a while. Of course, once one of them gets taken out by Jason, we realize it's most likely going to be the other one. And then we have the comic relief of Ted and Jimmy, and Jimmy is played by Crispin Glover. This was before his big breakthrough in Back to the Future. He's one of the best parts of this film. I really love him in this. I really love Corey Feldman in this. All the other actors do a pretty fine job. They had experience, unlike a number of the previous Friday the 13th and numerous other slasher films. They had all been working for a while. Peter Barton, who plays Doug, had been on a short-lived show, TV show. Kimberly Beck was actually a child actress. She had been in Alfred Hitchcock's Marnie at a very young age, and I think she even appeared in films as a baby. Her mother was an actress, so she was practically acting from birth. And I think one of the other female actresses had also been a child star. And then we have Judy Aronson, who would go on to be in Weird Science, one of my childhood favorites. And After Midnight, I think just prior to this, or maybe just after. And Lawrence Monason had been in The Last American Virgin. So they were all working actors in this case. Eric Anderson is interesting because I always mistake him for John Tenney, who was in The Closer. And I guess Eric Anderson was on Major Crimes, which was the spinoff of The Closer. And they look very similar. I always think that when I watch this film that I'm actually watching John Tenney. And I don't know if any of these people have been on an episode of Murder, She Wrote or not. But since they are supposed to be a group of friends as opposed to counselors who are just meeting each other for the first time, I think the chemistry works, especially between Ted and Jimmy, and their little repartee at the beginning of the film on the car ride there is just classic.
It says you're a dead fuck. What? A dead fuck? A lousy lay. You know? A dead... Oh, I see. Oh, don't hold it back from me, Doc. I can take it. Give it to me straight. I did not say it. The computer did. Yeah, well, there is no computer. Aha. And there's no Betty, either. And I'm a dead fuck. Like I said, the computer don't lie. God, I'm horny.
And of course, you cannot talk about Friday the 13th, the final chapter, without at least mentioning Crispin Glover's notorious, infamous, and amazing dance routine. This is the point where I really wish that this podcast had video, because if you haven't seen it, you're missing out. If you have seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is one of the greatest 20 to 30 seconds of cinema in all of movie history. If you haven't seen it, watch the damn movie just for that, or at least look it up on YouTube. So along with the mirroring or echoing of Halloween, there are connections to, or callbacks to, the previous Friday the 13th films, and I think some of that is fan service, just like how in part 3 we have a death that mirrors a death in part 1. I think some of the inspiration comes from within the franchise itself. We have, for the second time in a row, we have the final girl throwing herself through a top-story window. We have, as in I think all of the previous 3 films, defenestration of a dead character. I just had to get that opportunity in to say one of my favorite words, defenestration, which, apropos of nothing, was a clue on Jeopardy last night. That would be Thursday, November 7th, 2019, if you want to look up that clip.
It's not that funny.
And I don't mean to imply that the similarities are in any way due to lazy writing. That was one of the criticisms of the franchise, I mean, even from just part 2 on, that it's all the same old thing. There are some very inventive kills in this movie, and I think the overall mood and tone is a lot different than the previous 3. And I think that family angle has a lot to do with that. In the 3rd installment of the franchise, we get some backstory with the main character, with the final girl in that film, and her attack by Jason at an earlier date, which sort of implies this violation, whether sexual or not. And with chapter 4, I keep wanting to say chapter 4, with the final chapter, the family unit has been broken up with the dad leaving them. And so there is that hanging over them. We have Tommy, not necessarily represented as a troubled child, but he has unusual interests. He is a special effects geek. And of course, I think the name is a nod to Tom Savini, who had returned for this entry to do the makeup effects and effectively kill off Jason. That was the whole point of calling it the final chapter. We are finally going to kill off Jason, which was supposed to happen in part 3 and end the trilogy. So Tom Savini's back. We've got little Tommy with masks and other effects gear in his room. And also, I do think it's a nod to Halloween with the Tommy characters. But with this family drama, we also get this weird thing with the mom, which I actually want, when you watch these movies repeatedly, you kind of tune out on some of the subtext because you know where the story's going. You know what's going to happen. You know when the kills occur. And I kind of forget that they set up the mom as a possible red herring in this, which echoes, of course, the first film and having a mother be the killer in that one. I hope I didn't spoil that for everybody.
It's time for another tangent.
And that reminds me, I would have gotten poor Steve killed in Scream as well, because I would have been one of the people that either misremembered or didn't remember at all that Jason was not the killer in the first movie.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason!
I'm sorry. That's the wrong answer.
So when the teens show up that are going to be habitating the house across the street from them, the mom looks out the window and gives them this ominous look. I mean, we know Jason's escaped from the hospital, but, there's still the open-ended possibility here of someone else doing the murders. Rob is also set up as a red herring. He seems a little sketchy at first until he explains why he's there. And the family angle, or the broken family, would be revisited again in part 7, I believe, with a father who is abusive to the mother and the child. And so, it's nice to have that something extra in the films other than just Jason killing off nubile teens. One other way that this mirrors the second film is that Tommy's transformation into Jason calls back Ginny's impersonation of Pamela Voorhees in that second installment. So it's nice little touches throughout that, again, if you're a critic, seem lazy. If you're a fan, it's a nice reminder of what has come before. One of the criticisms of the film is that this is where Jason starts to have some otherworldly powers before that's actually set up in part 6, I believe. No, part 5? No, part 6.
What are you even talking about?
Where the third iteration of Tommy Jarvis revives the dead and rotting Jason accidentally, and he comes back as basically a super powerful zombie. But in the final chapter, we have a little bit of teleportation with Jason, and I think I figured it out. And again, this may be something that someone has already figured out, fans of the franchise or just people who pay more attention to slasher films when they're watching them. But there's a scene where we have 3 kills from Jason happening within the rental house that the teens are staying in. And again, this is a reminder for me of Halloween, where a lot of the kills take place inside homes. So Jason dispatches of Jimmy, and we get a kind of an instance of a little bit of Jason humor here with the corkscrew.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's the corkscrew?
And then next he throws out one of the twins from an upstairs window, and then he is immediately back downstairs picking up a knife and cleaning it off, which I don't think he has used yet. Things get a little confusing at this point for me, and uses that to kill Ted. Now, I think we have just a matter of re-editing here. This sequence was edited out of order because it makes much more sense for Jason to have offed Jimmy, get the knife out of the drawer, go take care of
That doesn't sound right.
Go take care of Ted in the front room watching the dirty movies, and then proceed upstairs to throw the girl out the window. There is a bit more teleportation that can't be explained by editing when Jason is behind the little movie projector and then behind the screen where Ted is watching these films. But again, suspend your disbelief. These are the things that most horror fans forgive in films. Something that would probably drive my wife crazy if she were watching. And I don't want to go through each kill other than to note that they are pretty inventive. I think Tom Savini was having a lot of fun with this one. We get a corkscrew to the hand, a cleaver to the face, a hacksaw to the neck, a palm through the face, and assorted machete kills. On the DVD, we have the deleted scenes, and so you get a lot more of the kills. All of these movies, especially the Friday the 13th franchise, were cut to ribbons by the MPAA. And so you get a little extra. It almost seems like Joe Zito wasn't really all that into the effects. He describes them as gross and gory and disgusting throughout the special features on the disc. So I don't think he minded the cuts so much. But do you get an idea that a couple more frames in each one would have had a much stronger impact? Okay, immediately after saying that, I know that there's two kills that I do want to discuss kind of in detail. And one of them is a completely bloodless kill, but which has sort of gone down in infamy among fans of the franchise and fans of slashers in general. And that is when Jason takes out Rob, who of course has been set up as the hero of the story. How it kind of didn't work exactly how they wanted it. I enjoy it because I get what they were trying to do. It's a lot more realistic than most of the kills in these movies, where you have maybe a girl or a guy screaming or not saying much of anything as they're being killed. And in the case of Rob, it was sort of supposed to echo the Kitty Genovese murder in New York, which, according to legend, had her screaming, he's killing me, and no one came to help her. The story has kind of been disputed since it happened, I think in the 60s, but that was the inspiration for this. The point was to make it more realistic, to have some empathy for the characters that get killed instead of just cheering for it. But it sort of came out a little bit silly to some, and I guess was met with laughter a lot of the time in the theater. Again, I kind of get it. I think maybe the delivery is what hampers that scene. But it's still pretty effective, and it makes you stop and think for a minute. What am I watching? I'm watching all of these kids get slaughtered, and it's been dozens of kids since, over this however 4 or 5 day period, really, when you think about it. And then the other kill is, of course, when Tommy Jarvis takes out Jason finally, and he has dressed up as a young Jason to get his attention and confuse him and stop him from attacking his sister. And he hits him on the side of the head with the machete, and it goes about halfway through, which is gruesome enough. But then Jason falls on the floor and slides down the machete. And I remember being utterly grossed out and absolutely loving that from the first time I saw it. So whenever that scene comes up, I am super excited to see that special effect. The other great thing about the final chapter is our final girl. Trish has been set up as kind of not meek, but obviously they're going through this family drama. She is withdrawn. She does not go and party with the group of teens at the house. She doesn't really join them when they run into them by the lake. She keeps separate from all of that. And when she is confronted by Jason, she goes balls out. And yes, there is screaming, and yes, there are hysterics, but she is not hysterical when Rob is being killed, she actually leaves and then goes back down to try and intervene. And then there is an extended tete-a-tete with Jason where it is back and forth between the two of them. And she gets in some great punches and some great swings on Jason. And apparently this was all very real. The stuntman who played Jason in this film, said, have at it. And that's why I'm here and I can handle it. And so she lands a lot of real punches on him. I think she's probably my favorite final girl of the franchise as well. I like Jenny a lot from the second installment, but I would have to give Trish the top honors, at least for me. And we end with another callback to the first movie with Trish in the hospital surrounded by police. And there was supposed to be a dream sequence like there was in the first one that got cut. Then that also explained their mother's death, or at least showed that she had in fact died. We only see her reacting to something off screen that we have to assume is Jason, and then we never see her again. But in the deleted scene, Trish finds her in the bathtub and she is dead. And then we find out that it's actually a dream sequence, but we have to assume that her mom is dead either way. And then, of course, Tommy comes in and gives that dead-eyed look straight into camera. The thought was, if we are going to continue with Friday the 13th, Jason is dead, Tommy will be the new killer. We will branch off from there. And they do bring Tommy back for part 5 and for part 6, played by 2 different actors. And it doesn't go quite there. But yeah, I'm not even going to talk about part 5 because that movie really bugged me. That's a whole other ball of wax. Can of worms? One of those 2 things.
What are you even talking about?
Okay, that is my talk about my favorite Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, directed by Joseph Zito, whose previous film was The Prowler, which, although it didn't make it to my top 10 list, it was an honorable mention, and I may very well throw that up as an option for the next poll, which I should be putting up shortly to help with the next episode. Alrighty, to end this episode, I will whip out the Wake Up Heavy watch list so you all can know what I have watched since the last time. I may very well have lost my place on my list from last time, so if this first one is a repeat, I apologize. I watched Tony Scott's The Hunger, which was an inspiration from Fright Night, and that was recorded from TCM. I watched an anthology film on Shudder called Nightmare Cinema, which was, as many anthologies are, hit and miss. I watched Greta with Isabelle Huppert and Chloe Grace Moretz, which I kind of enjoyed. And then, of course, I watched all the Friday the 13th films and the documentary, which I have already mentioned. I watched one from my childhood that I enjoyed so much, Audrey Rose, one of those reincarnation films that sort of turns into a courtroom drama and gets a little bit boring after a while, but it's still worth a look. And the family watched the live-action version of Aladdin, which tested my patience tremendously. I watched the new version of Pet Sematary, which of course I mentioned on the Stephen King wrap-up episode. I went to the cinema and saw The Lighthouse, Robert Eggers' new movie. He directed The Witch a few years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago now, and I really, really enjoyed it. Let's see, I caught Wounds on Hulu, which started out really strong and really had my interest, and then kind of tanked towards the end, but still worth a look. And then I did a kind of double feature here of late 80s horror films that I went and saw in the theater. I watched The Believers with Martin Sheen and The Serpent and the Rainbow with Bill Pullman. Both have a little bit of not so PC cultural representation in them, but they are pretty good movies. Let's see if there's anything else other than the Friday the 13th films here. No, I think that is it for this go-around. Thank you for listening to Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror. Until next time, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And don't forget to submit your spooky stories so I have more of those to read at the end of these episodes. You can find all that information on the blog, wakeupheavy.com. There is also a link on the SoundCloud page. So take a look and submit your story. I would love to read it on the show. Okay, thank you so much for listening, and don't forget,
Anything can happen when you wake up heavy.